Okay, so recently I was working with trying to um, get real-time video playback working on my BJX2 core. Um, and to these ends I've ended up making yet another custom codec, or custom video codec. Um, my first attempt was like trying to use the CRAM, or Microsoft Video 1, or commonly known as CRAM video, which basically, in my first attempt using that codec, got like roughly 500 megs for a roughly 4-minute video, which was clearly unreasonable. Um, Whereas, yeah, this is a video codec that was from the early 90s from Video for Windows, but even at fairly low resolutions and short video segments, it can still produce large files. It is possible to bump down the quality and get smaller files. For example, this one can be shown, but like, so yeah, this file was still like 50 megs, but has considerable smearing and artifacting, and apparently no iframes. So yeah, with this much artifacting, its CRAM was, or naively using CRAM was clearly unreasonable, because I'm dealing with a relatively slow, like a slow link from the SD card, and even with this poor of quality, it's still like roughly 1.5 megabits, which is not reasonable. Um, so yeah, my next attempt was using another of my codecs, but while it compresses a lot better, it was kind of slow. So I've started on another attempt, which I'd called BTIC5A. In concept, it's vaguely similar to CRAM, but in concept it's vaguely similar. However, it primarily uses index color mode, which well, halves the amount of space required for colors, and is much more aggressively bit whittled, so on average it uses smaller blocks. So for example, 24 megs here for a vid. Hold on. Crap. Windows UI is being so 211 megs for the original video is CRAM, and 24 megs. So in effect, like the transcoding reduced the bitrate by nearly a factor of 10, which is actually a lot more than what could have been expected from the difference between the formats, because having the size of the colors, but still using roughly 16-bit pixel blocks, you would expect, say, like a 2 to 3 reduction in file size maybe, but what I'm seeing is actually closer to around 10. So, yeah. Oh, yeah. Can demonstrate with the original CRAM video. When it fires up, in this case. That's, you know, fairly low resolution, but so yeah, not super high resolution, but still still a 200 meg file and stuff. And 200 megs is a bit much for 320 by 200, so yeah. So here's what it looks, or fire up the emulator at 50 megahertz. And so I cried when I'm lying in bed to get it all what's in my head, and I a little peculiar. And so I wake in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath. So realized a slight issue there, but stuff is being kind of laggy now for some reason, but no. And so I cried when I'm lying in bed to get it all what's in my head, and so and so I wake in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath and get real high and loud, sit to the top of my dome. So yeah, quality isn't great, but it is, you know, still reasonably useful, especially considering a factor of 10 reduction in file size. And it also being essentially a byte-oriented format in roughly the same general complexity range as CRAM. So, yeah. It could be noted there that there was, you know, sort of a tendency for the colors to get a bit off and then pop into being more correct. That's due partly to it updates the palette on iframes and stuff, and in those cases the color palette was lagging behind the sudden changes in scenery. So that is currently a limitation. It would be necessary otherwise to detect sudden changes and possibly either trigger an iframe early or otherwise rebuild the palette. But that is itself partly a limitation of it being 256 color. So yeah. And I have another video. Wait. Just edited the wrong thing there. Wanted this one. So this video was 14 megs, which is also a bit smaller, but the audio quality isn't really so great on this either, but and I'm mostly focusing on the video quality in this case, but can be seen it is fairly reasonable, at least all things considered. This video is, as noted, purely monochrome in nature, so has some interesting properties. Because the video is monochrome, it also doesn't have nearly so much need for an optimized palette as, say, some of the other videos I was testing with. Yeah, for note, this is a song known as Bad Apple. If anyone actually wants to listen to it on YouTube or something, so that's yeah. And switch back to the other one. Oh yeah, the palette popping in is still a little bit obvious. Currently I have it set up to rebuild the palette about once a second or so, but I can tweak that. I had tested with some other videos, not using this codec yet, or not using this codec, but so I have to copy the name over because well, consistency. So yeah, this is me attempting to test with the Lindsay Sterling video, which can be noted held up okay with my 4B codec, but has the issue that in order to actually not lag seriously, I have to use a fairly low frame rate. Yeah, partly because 50 megahertz isn't exactly all that fast. So yeah, and also the quality is pretty low as well, but that was another trade-off, partly because lowering the quality also reduces the computational cost to some extent. So that's what I went with in this case. One can point out that, yeah, I'm running it in the emulator rather than on an FPGA in this case, but the results of running it on an FPGA will be reasonably similar to those of the emulator. I had tested with some other videos as well. And I'd have to, copy over the file names. Okay. Don't remember which one of these is a good one, but yeah, this was another Lindsay Sterling video I tested with, but it had the problem of in a lot of parts being fairly computationally expensive, so it tends to lag out to some extent. Yep. The 4B codec is different from from the other ones I was testing with, in that the 4B codec is using an entropy coder. So yeah, entropy coding does allow it to deliver a little bit better quality at a lower bit rate, but there are limits to what it can do, and also the trade-off is entropy coding also makes decoding more expensive as well. So some drop off in frame rate could be seen there. As noted, because of CPU limits. So yeah, it sort of works, but frequently it frequently bogs down with a lot of the stuff going on. Whereas yeah, some other codecs like CRAM and similar, and also my 5A codec, are a lot cheaper to decode, so they don't really bog down like this. But with the trade-off that the potential for video quality is less. And even this is, you know, not exactly good video quality, but on the other hand, it is arguably set to some fairly low settings. This is showing like random frame dumps from the video size testing with, so it can allow basically frame by frame comparisons of the same frame in both the original and transcoded version. So since original, and this one is using the 5A codec, which does sharpen the edges somewhat, as can be expected. I'll grab these two frames. Result is, you know, similar. So transcoding does have a fairly obvious reduction in terms of image quality, but it is not an unexpected consequence. So yeah, general summary of the format is, well, at the outer layer it's using a simple TLV packaging inside of an AVI. So nothing that unusual there. So it can have have tags that represent either image data or an optional header, which is used on iframes, or an updated color palette, which generally only occurs in iframes, but technically nothing prevents including a color palette with a P frame as well, which is a possible option if they're, yeah, it is a possible option if handled with care. It also has possible secondary LC encoding, but I've not been using that in this test, or at least not yet. So the format itself is byte based, so if you have a byte with the low bit clear, then it's interpreted as 16 bits of pixel data, followed by 2 color bytes, which are again referencing the palette, and they're interpreted as a 4x4 block with 1 bit per pixel. The 1 bit per pixel just sort of selects for each pixel whether it's color A or color B. So it has delta vectors for like motion compensation, but that's not used in this case, or not being used in this case, because currently it's only using skip mode. So it has a 2-byte encoding for flat colors, so not too much notable there. And also has 2x2 blocks that can reuse the prior colors and can be encoded in a single byte, or multiple 2x2 blocks can be encoded in well, more bytes. So yeah. As for how it's like gaining, or how it's ending up with videos that are about 10 times smaller than CRAM is a mystery I've not quite figured out yet. This is a difference shouldn't be quite that large, given the way CRAM works, but it's a mystery. Well, because yeah, for the most part in CRAM video, they'll also use a 4x4 block with 1 bit per pixel, but it's just the color values will be 16 bits rather than like 8 bits. So that would mean roughly 48 bits to update a color block as opposed to 32. As can be noted, that's only a difference of about like 50%. So it's yeah, so that's not by itself sufficient to explain the difference. And a lot of the other stuff, it's a little bit more compact, because for example, for short runs it can, or for short skip runs and similar, can encode those in a single byte rather than needing 2 bytes, but again, that's a factor of 2, not a factor of 10. So it would appear that in any case there's something else going on that's clearly different, but yeah. Pulling this up again. Yeah, this is the original CRAM video, and as can be noted, 320 by 200 at 25 frames per second, and video bit rate is nearly 14 megabits, and yeah, bit over 8 bits per pixel, which is yeah, it's not clear why it's doing that. And yeah, clearly that, but in any case, yeah, that's not ideal. Audio is as noted, ADPCM, which is what I've mostly been using for a lot of this stuff. So yeah. Good old 16 kilohertz ADPCM achieves like a fairly sufficient audio quality in 64K bits. And yeah, not really sure why more people don't use ADPCM. Like yeah, because it is like a clearly effective technology, or still a fairly effective technology, and is fairly simple and cheap to decode. So yeah, and it doesn't really sound like too terrible. So and I just sort of grabbed this video for testing because I thought it was kind of amusing. And yeah, I've basically talked about the topic I was going to talk about, so all for now.